Although our nation was founded upon the principles of Christian faith, it often seems that modern society bears little resemblance to its spiritual past. Do people of faith have a role to play within government? Or should religious faith remain outside of government policy? Discover the forgotten and astonishing story of our nation's foundation in the American Heritage series. For centuries, Americans were taught a truthful view of history that recognized the godly heroes and moral foundation our nation was founded upon. But in recent years, a new version of history has assaulted the moral and spiritual fiber of our nation, leaving the truth of our past eliminated and forgotten until today. Join historian David Barton and experience the untold story of our nation's history in the American Heritage series.
We've been really squeezed down in all these areas, and as a consequence, the church is having less impact on the culture now than it's ever had in American history.
The rich spiritual heritage and religious beliefs of our founding fathers is met with increasing hostility in the political arena.
We don't really get in with a duty concept that says, I'm standing on this ground and I'm not moving. This is where God's put me, and I don't care whether I feel inspired to do it or not. I'm going to stay right here because it's the right thing to do.
What can history tell us about the success or failure of mixing religious faith with political influence?
If America's going to ever get back to the strength of culture that it had, it's going to be because Christianity regains the place of influence that it had, which will only occur if Christians take the initiative and get involved.
And what role does a citizen play in maintaining the spiritual integrity of our nation? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage series. America, this is your heritage.
One of the greatest forces for positive good in America has been Christianity. It's produced the abolition movement, anti-slavery movement. It's produced the civil rights movement. It's produced common education, open education for all individuals. It brought an end to the child labor movement. It did the urban renewal. It's done so much positive good, and yet it's under attack more than any other single area of American culture. Is this one area that's done so much positive good. And it's really under attack in a lot of different arenas. In any culture, in any nation, you have four major institutions that will shape that culture. Those institutions tend to be judiciary and government. They tend to be education, tend to be media and entertainment, and the fourth institution is the pulpit and the church. Essentially, Christianity has given up 3.5 institutions out of the 4.
Wow.
Now, judiciary has come after Christianity, really squeezed it into a box. Education's attacked it. We've seen the revisionism and how we've changed our textbooks. We don't talk about what Christianity did in America's history. We've really seen Hollywood and media and news come after Christians and vilify them and demonize them. And then even in the pulpit, it's gotten to where we've kind of given up half the pulpit. We kind of let the IRS and government tell us what we can and can't say in church. And so pastors don't even have the same right of free speech that every other citizen in America does. So we've been really squeezed down in all these areas. And as a consequence, the church is having less impact on the culture now than it's ever had in American history. Did you know that American ministers used to stand in the pulpit and call candidates by name, call parties by name, set forth their positions, compare them to the Bible, and then advise that a Christian could or could not vote for a candidate based on what the candidate had said and what the Bible said? Today, this type of sermon might make many in churches uncomfortable, but it shouldn't. For not only was this a traditional practice of American pulpits, it's also a traditional practice set forth in the Scriptures. Consider how often God sent His ministers either to interface with or to confront civil leaders. For example, Elijah with Ahab and Jezebel, Samuel with Saul, Nathan and Gad with David, Isaiah with Manasseh, and so many other examples. There certainly is no model in the Bible where God has His ministers remain silent with civil leaders or about civil issues. The church speaking into the civil arena has been a long-standing practice in America, as had the practice of ministers serving directly in the legislature. In fact, it was Thomas Jefferson himself who encouraged the lifting of restrictions against ministers and clergy that had been imposed in his own state of Virginia. He declared,
I observe in the Virginia Constitution an abridgment of a right I do not approve. It is the incapacitation of a clergyman from being elected.
Thomas Jefferson wished to see clergymen possess the same rights as others. Today, however, this is not the case in the area of free speech. nor has it been since 1954, when a U.S. Senator became responsible for enacting a policy that treated nonprofit organizations, including churches, differently. He had been criticized for his political affiliations and his private business dealings, and not liking that criticism, he added a rider to an appropriation bill in the U.S. Senate stipulating for the first time that a 501c3 organization, and churches are 501c3 organizations, that they must now stay out of the political arena. Most Christians think that the way it is today is the way it's always been. But this restriction is recent, as both American law books and early American sermons clearly demonstrate. The record is clear. The church helped shape the way that early America approached the issues of the day, and having taught the nation the relevancy of God's Word to every aspect of life, it's not surprising then that the Scriptures and writers on the Scriptures had such a profound impact on the founding of our government and its documents.
You're talking about four main systems we have been squeezed out of, as it were, as you're saying, and influence is really what we're supposed to have in this life. I mean,
exactly. We're supposed to be influenced in this life. We're supposed to be salt and light. We're supposed to get into all these arenas,
right,
and we pulled out of them. And part of it is, quite frankly, we're pretty wimpy. We don't like conflict. You know, we're not going to go for conflict. And so, oh man, if they're going to attack me, I'm going to go start my own group somewhere and we'll hide over here where they can't come after me.
Right.
We're less willing to stand up and confront and say, that is not true and here is the truth. We say, well, you know, let's not get into a controversy over this. And you can't do that. I mean, I look even at the media, how much we've given up in the media.
Yeah.
When you go back and look, for example, at the Denver Post after World War II, you'll find that on Monday morning in most national papers, they would reprint several of the sermons that were preached on Sunday. So if you missed church on Sunday, you could read some good sermons on Monday morning. And you go, I don't think the media's quite like that today. It's not quite that friend. Why was that? You see, all of these institutions, interesting thing about institutions is institutions have no intrinsic value on their own. Institutions are just like cars. They take on the nature of whoever's behind the wheel.
Got it.
What's happened is we bailed out of media and entertainment.
Right.
Yes.
We bailed out of education. Oh man, it's really tough to deal with those negative, atheistic, agnostic, secularist, postmodern professors. We think we'll go start our own Christian schools. Nothing wrong with starting Christian schools, but what we do is we don't engage the culture. Despite the rich heritage of Christian faith and expression in America, and despite the strong foundation that is provided for our country, things have begun to change. In only a few short decades, hundreds of years of religious freedoms have been erased. While there have been scores of horrible rulings by courts, perhaps none is any more egregious than this recent case that went to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's called Jane Doe versus Santa Fe Independent School District. Santa Fe is a small rural town outside of Houston, Texas, and they have a long tradition of prayer at graduations and prayer at athletic events like football games. Yet a handful of students in that school didn't want anyone else praying. They were offended. So they went to a federal judge and asked him to make everyone else stop praying. The judge ruled that he would allow prayer to continue at graduations and athletic events, but only if students prayed the right words when they prayed. He ruled,
the court will allow that prayer to be a typical non-denominational prayer, which can refer to God or the Almighty or that sort of thing. The prayer must not refer to Jesus or anyone else. And make no mistake, the court is going to have a United States Marshal in attendance at the graduation. If any student offends this court, that student will be summarily arrested and will face up to 6 months incarceration in the Galveston County Jail for contempt of court. Anybody who violates these orders, no kidding, is going to wish that he or she had died as a child when this court gets through with it.
died as a child? If you pray the wrong words in a prayer, you're going to wish that you had died as a child when this court gets through with you? This ruling obviously angers most citizens.
The rich spiritual heritage and religious beliefs of our founding fathers is met with increasing hostility in the political arena. What can history tell us about the success or failure of mixing religious faith with political influence? And what role does a citizen play in maintaining the spiritual integrity of our nation? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage Series. America, this is your heritage.
Today's pseudo-historians not willing to let truth or historical facts stand in the way of their personal secularist convictions, declared just the opposite, asserting that neither our nation nor its leaders were influenced by Christianity. For example, this article declares, "Our founding presidents were not Christians." This article similarly announces, "The founding fathers were not Christians." Notice the emphasis on the word "not." This article proclaims that the signers of the Declaration were enemies of Christ. And the LA Times heralds America's unchristian beginnings with an inset box declaring, "The founding fathers, most, despite the preachings of our pious right, were deists who rejected the divinity of Jesus." In short, according to these and many other writers, our founding fathers were a collective group of atheists, agnostics, and deists. They didn't believe in Jesus. They weren't Christians. And since our founders were apparently nothing more than a group of atheists, agnostics, and deists, then the title of this current university textbook seems to make complete sense: The Godless Constitution. Many Americans today would not disagree with these characterizations of the Founding Fathers. After all, if you look at the painting of the signers of the Declaration, who are the two founders that all Americans can immediately recognize? Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, of course. But wait, don't stop there. Which one is Samuel Huntington? Or Robert Livingston? Or George Clinton? Or Robert Morris? Or Stephen Hopkins? Or Richard Henry Lee? Or George Reed? Or Roger Sherman? Or Elbridge Gerry? Or the others? We don't seem to know anything about these signers. Isn't it interesting that we've been trained to recognize the two least religious founding fathers, Franklin and Jefferson? We don't know the others, but we're told that they were just like Franklin and Jefferson. Actually, in defense of Franklin and Jefferson, while they are the two least religious founders, least is a comparative term. They are the least religious of the group, but even they're more religious than most religious individuals today. After all, Benjamin Franklin recommended Christianity in the public schools of Pennsylvania, and he worked to raise church attendance across the state. He also made one of the nation's most forceful defenses of religion when he was attacked by Thomas Paine, the author of the infamous Age of Reason. And it was Franklin, citing numerous Bible verses to prove his point, who called for the establishment of chaplains and daily prayer at the Constitutional Convention. And these are the documented actions of one of the least religious founding fathers. And then there's Thomas Jefferson. Not only did Jefferson recommend that the Great Seal of the United States depict a Bible story and include the word God in the national motto, but as president, Jefferson negotiated treaties with the Indians in which he included direct federal funding to pay for Christian missionaries to evangelize the Indians. And these treaties were ratified by the U.S. Senate. Furthermore, Jefferson closed presidential documents with the appellation, "In the year of our Lord Christ," thus invoking Jesus Christ into official government documents. We've been fighting cultural war in America for 30 years. It's really judicially created. Judiciary has gone after things like the sanctity of life. They've gone after issues like the sanctity of marriage. They've gone after religious expressions. They go after and they go after them on such a regular basis. Now, when we win victories in those areas, we rarely hear that. But if we get a court decision that whacks again in those areas, we're going to hear that. So what happens is we get a steady diet of we're losing ground, we're losing ground, we're losing ground, and we don't hear the victories. And a great example is in the area of abortion. Currently, recent polls over the last several years have shown a very steady increase in Americans among those who oppose abortions. Matter of fact, right now, less than 1/4 of Americans support Roe v. Wade and abortion on demand. Now, that's less than 1/4. Now, that doesn't mean they want abortion totally ended. That means they oppose abortion on demand, which is abortion for any reason, which is what America's had for decades. Now, you would never know that by listening to political leaders that are televised on TV, listening to what the courts say. You'd think, you know, if you're pro-life, you're in a pretty small minority. Not so. What you find now is that the most pro-life group in America is older women. It tends to be the older the woman, the more pro-life she is. So the most pro-life group we have in America right now is among women 65 years old and older. Do you know what the second most pro-life group in America is right now?
No.
It's women 24 and under. So it's coming back on the other side.
Wow.
The next generation. Do you know that among teenagers right now, only 19% of teenagers support abortion on demand? The next generation is so much stronger than even the current generation, and what's coming up with the next generation is really significant stuff. As a matter of fact, UCLA does a study every year called the College Freshman. They've done this since 1966. They survey not 10, 20, 30, 40 kids or 500 kids like a normal survey. They go over 200,000 kids a year in the survey, college freshmen from over 250 different universities, colleges. Do you know that right now we have a greater opposition to abortion among young people than we had even in 1966 when it was illegal?
Oh my goodness.
Right now we have more kids who believe in premarital sexual abstinence than even in 66. I mean, in every category, our kids are more socially conservative than any group in well over 40 years.
It's amazing.
And you go, now where'd that come from?
Yeah.
I mean,
Really.
Because they're more conservative than their parents, they're more conservative than their teachers. What's happening here? Interesting thing out of the Bible. You find in the Bible several times where God's people start praying for revival. In other words, they get under oppression, they say the culture's wrong, turn the culture. Great example of that is in Judges 13, where the people were under the oppression of the Philistines. They couldn't worship the way they wanted to. They couldn't live according to God's word. They're under this cultural oppression. And they pray and pray and pray and pray. And God finds a guy named Manoah. And he says, Manoah, God's heard the prayers of this people. He's going to deliver this people from the Philistines. Your culture's going to be changed. Here's how it works. Your wife's going to have a kid, and when that kid grows up, he's going to be the national deliverer. You go, wait a minute, time out. You mean I got to wait 20 more years for this to occur? What you find is that God usually answers the prayers for changing culture by sending you a new generation.
Oh my goodness.
It's transgenerational stuff. So when you see this next generation coming up, you go, man, this is going to be really good. I mean, look at the values of these kids. For centuries, American education included religious and moral principles within student instruction, and there's no question of the academic success of that philosophy. However, there have been great changes in recent years, efforts to completely secularize public education. The results have not been good. In fact, to verify the weakness of the current approach, simply look at the present condition of education. Since the court ordered a completely secular approach to public education in 1962, educational scores have plummeted, evidenced by the dramatic decline in college-bound student SAT scores. Furthermore, in recent international academic competitions, American high school students have regularly finished last, near the last, or in the bottom half of students in both math and science testing. In fact, in a recent international testing, although American elementary students performed above average and junior high students performed at average, American high school students finished at the bottom, thus prompting one critic to remark, the longer U.S. students stay in school, the less they seem to know. Additionally, illiteracy has skyrocketed in America, evidenced by the fact that America now ranks a dismal 65th in the world in literacy among 200 nations, and a number of third world nations currently post higher literacy rates than the United States, whereas only a few decades ago, we had been the best. Illiteracy is so rampant that among recent high school graduates, 700,000 of them, after 12 years of public school, were unable to read their own diplomas. These are not the educational results that Americans had experienced under the former philosophy of education. In fact, it is the current decline and failure in the quality of public education, as evidenced through numerous measurements, that has produced a rapid rise in the popularity of and support for school choice. In fact, almost 24 states have now passed some form of educational choice in order to give students a way to escape failing educational systems. The educational achievements of earlier generations stand in stark contrast to those of today, and numerous American students in those early years routinely achieved at an early age what today we consider extraordinary. For example, Declaration signer Charles Carroll entered college at the age of 10. Fisher Ames entered Harvard when he was 12 years old. And Benjamin Rush graduated from Princeton when he was only 14. And John Trumbull, a law student under John Adams and a justice on the Supreme Court of Connecticut, had already read through the Bible for the first time when he was 4 years old. When he was 6, he won a Greek contest against his local minister. And when he was 7.5 years old, he passed the entrance exam to Yale University. But his parents decided to hold him out until he was 13 so that he could attend college with his peers. There are many similar examples. And while entering a university at 13 or 14 seems a young age to us today, it was not then. And the academics were harder then than they are now.
The rich spiritual heritage and religious beliefs of our founding fathers is met with increasing hostility in the political arena. What can history tell us about the success or failure of mixing religious faith with political influence? And what role does a citizen play in maintaining the spiritual integrity of our nation? Discover our nation's godly history in the American Heritage Series. America, this is your heritage.
It seems like what you're saying, Dave, is that influence is really what the kingdom of God is.
Yeah,
that it is influence, and that it's ourselves that's keeping us out. We just simply need to go occupy the land, and things change.
What we're suffering from is our own lack of involvement.
Got it.
We have never been in the minority in this country. As a matter of fact, let me just hit some national polls real quick. Over the last 8 to 10 years, the whole issue of creation has been in the polls. And you would think that those that are in favor of intelligent design or creation got to be wackos. Only 10 to 14% of the nation actually believes evolution. You have roughly 80 to 85% of the nation that thinks we should be having daily voluntary spoken prayer skills. I mean, they go through every category. We're not in the minority. We just think we are. And the scripture says, Proverbs 23:7, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he.
Yes.
We think we're the minority. I can't make a difference. There's nothing I can do. And by the tens of millions, we sit around and do nothing. And that's what's killing us. And in education, we're seeing change. This is one of the brand new textbooks that's out for our public schools. This little book right here. Now, I'll tell you something that's cool about this book. When a national textbook comes out, if a textbook gets 30% of the national market, because you have 6 to 8 competitors, if they get 30% of the national market, you consider that textbook to have cornered the market. This little baby now has 80% of the national market.
Oh, that's awesome.
Now, if I just hit a couple of little highlights here, well, look here, right off the bat, we have Thanksgiving. And we actually talk about the time that we thank God. And we look at all the places across America where we had early Thanksgivings. Now, textbooks in the last couple decades have been saying Thanksgiving's the time when the pilgrims say thank you to the Indians for teaching us how to hunt. Well, now we're back to thanking God in this. Here's another section with William Penn, the minister who founded Pennsylvania. Well, we don't talk about ministers doing anything positive,
Right.
Wow.
but you find out that most of the colonies are founded by ministers. You also have George Washington being sworn in, and it's not just being sworn in as president. We actually say that he's got his hand on a Bible. Oh my, you know, this is terrible. A guy in government with his hand on the Bible. And then we've got the Second Great Awakening, and we show all the revivals. But that's America's history.
That's right.
Now, with kids learning that, what are they going to be 20 years from now when somebody says, oh no, America's got secular foundations? No, they've seen something different. So the good news is that we're starting to make progress in these areas. When ungodly individuals enter an arena, their values enter with them. After decades of the extraction of godly individuals and thus godly principles from public affairs, the change in philosophy became apparent in our national leaders, especially at the U.S. Supreme Court. Consider, for example, the issue of school prayer and the public acknowledgement of God. School prayer had been practiced in America's public schools for 300 plus years, and it had been constitutional for 171 consecutive years under the Constitution. Why? Because school prayer had been constitutional in the personal beliefs of the Founding Fathers and in the beliefs of subsequent justices sworn to uphold the Constitution. However, in the 1960s, a new group appeared on the court with a different set of personal values. They uncovered a statement which suited their beliefs, a misleading phrase found neither in the Constitution, the First Amendment, nor any other official founding document. That phrase? Separation of church and state. But under the new application of this phrase, in 1962, in the case Engel versus Vitale, school prayer was suddenly and without precedent ruled to be unconstitutional. Then the very next year, the court struck down another long-standing practice of public schools, a practice implemented by founding fathers like Benjamin Rush, Noah Webster, Samuel Adams, John Adams, Jedediah Morse, William Samuel Johnson, and Thomas Jefferson. What was that practice? The use of the Bible in schools. On what ground did the court remove the Bible? For the second time in 2 years, those justices cited neither history nor legal precedent. They invoked not one founding father nor one previous court decision. They did, however, invoke the aid of a psychologist, and following his testimony, the U.S. Supreme Court announced a reason why the Bible must now be taken out of schools, following nearly 2 centuries of its use in schools. What was that reason? The Supreme Court explained that if portions of the New Testament were read with that explanation, they could be and had been psychologically harmful to the student. The basis for the decision in the 1963 Bible reading case is evidence that a leader will always rule by what he personally believes to be correct. He cannot separate the public policy that he enacts from that which he personally believes. In the case Stone v. Graham, the court even ruled that it was unconstitutional for students at public school to see a posted copy of the Ten Commandments. This ruling was amazing. for a picture of Moses holding the Ten Commandments is actually etched in stone inside the Supreme Court. Furthermore, the Ten Commandments appear in numerous civic buildings, courthouses, and legislatures across the nation. Why is it that the Ten Commandments hang in so many civic, governmental buildings, yet hang in so few churches? It is because that for over 2,000 years in the Western world, the Ten Commandments have been recognized as the basis of civil law. From them we derive such things as don't murder, don't steal, don't perjure yourself. Why then did the court rule that students could not see the very laws which form the basis of our current civil laws? The court explained that if the posted copies of the Ten Commandments are to have any effect at all, it will be to induce the school children to read, meditate upon, perhaps to venerate and obey the commandments. This is not permissible. God has so much in the Scriptures to say about judges. There are so many examples of Him having good, righteous judges in the Scripture. That's a great profession to go into. Yeah. And we're running away from the legal profession and run away from can't do that. I mean, if we do that, we'll keep getting pushed back further and further and further. And if we're going to retain the freedoms that we have, and the freedoms that we have are the result of Christianity, they're the result of the positive influence of Christianity, what we're doing now is throwing the baby and the bathwater both out. Because the very thing that gave us those freedoms, we're now putting in a little bitty box and saying, don't influence anything. And we're going along with that.
Yeah. So
we're letting them tie our hands. What we have to do, there's several things. It's hard for Christians to get involved. Christians get discouraged really easy.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that we've seen for years in modern history with the elections of Christians is if Christians get involved in an election and lose, they go home.
Oh my goodness.
But if they get involved in an election and win, they go home. You know, it's the same either way. We don't stay in things very long. We move from inspiration to inspiration.
Wow.
We don't really get in with a duty concept that says, I'm standing on this ground and I'm not moving. This is where God's put me, and I don't care whether I feel inspired to do it or not. I'm going to stay right here because it's the right thing to do.
That's awesome.
That kind of mentality we got to get back into. The other thing about Christians, though, is it's pretty easy to get them involved if you can show that we are moving in the right direction, if you can show that we're winning. Nobody loves to jump on a sinking ship. Right. So when you can say, you know, we're really not sinking, despite what you hear in the media, despite what educational leaders tell you, despite what the judiciary is doing, we're not losing this thing. But if America's going to ever get back to the strength of culture that it had, it's going to be because Christianity regains the place of influence that it had, which will only occur if Christians take the initiative and get involved in those arenas.
For more information on the American Heritage Series or to find books and other resources, visit wallbuilders.com. Through the American Heritage Series, renowned historian David Barton communicates our nation's forgotten, godly foundations and encourages us to once again view history through a truthful lens. For only when we recognize and embrace God's hand in our history can America become all that it was intended to be. Through Wall Builders, historian David Barton seeks to rebuild the walls of America's unique religious, moral, and constitutional heritage by educating the public and encouraging people of faith to become active in strengthening America's great foundations. For more information on how you can become involved, visit wallbuilders.com.